After a couple of generations making phones with flip-out cameras and increasingly large displays, Asus has taken the Zenfone 8 in a totally different direction: small. The flipping camera concept lives on in the also new Zenfone 8 Flip, but it's no longer a standard feature across this year's Zenfone lineup. Instead, priced at $599, the Zenfone 8 lands in the upper mid-range class with a conventional rear camera bump and a much smaller 5.9-inch display. As a side note, final US pricing is TBD. Asus says somewhere between $599 and $799, but it will be coming to North America, unlike last year's model. Rather than an attention-grabbing camera feature, the focus of this design has been to create a smaller phone that's comfortable to use in one hand, which Asus has done without skimping on processing power or higher-end features. It's an Android iPhone mini, and its fantastic Asus Zenfone 8 screen and design the Zenfone 8 may be small, but that has not kept it from offering the latest flagship processor, a Snapdragon 888 chipset, coupled with 6, 8, or 16 GB of RAM. I cannot find fault with this phone's performance. It feels responsive, animations and interactions are smooth, and it keeps up with demanding use and rapid app switching. This is performance fitting of a flagship device. The display is a 5.9-inch 1080p OLED panel with a fast 120Hz refresh rate that makes routine interactions with the phone swiping, scrolling, animations look much more smooth and polished than a standard 60Hz screen or even a 90Hz panel. By default, the phone will automatically switch between 120/90/60Hz depending on the application to save battery life, but you can manually select any of those three refresh rates if you prefer. The company says it settled on this slightly narrower format so the phone would fit more easily into a pocket, and it does. I cannot get it all the way into a back jeans pocket, but it mostly fits. More importantly, it fits well inside a jacket pocket and does not feel like it's going to flop out if I sit down on the floor to tie my shoes. The Zenfone 8 is rated IP68 for dust protection and some water submersion. I can't get IT all the way into a back jeans pocket, but IT mostly fits. The front panel is protected by Gorilla Glass Vitis and houses an in-display fingerprint sensor, while the back uses Gorilla Glass 3 with a frosted finish that's on the matte side of the matte/glossy spectrum. The front panel is flat, but the rear features a slight curve on the long edges for an easier fit in the hand. At 169 grams, it's heavy for its size, and it feels surprisingly dense when you first pick it up. The phone's frame is aluminum, giving the whole package a high-end look and feel. There's even a headphone jack on the top edge as a treat. The power button is well positioned so my right thumb falls on it naturally with the phone in my hand. Same for the in-screen fingerprint sensor. The target appears to be positioned higher on the screen than usual, but that actually puts it within a comfortable reach of my thumb. I will admit up front that I have a personal bias toward smaller phones, but the Zenfone 8 just feels great in my hand. I have spent a lot of time using big devices over the last 6 months, and I have gotten used to it. But the Zenfone 8 is the first device that feels like it was adapted to me, not something I have had to adapt to using. Asus Zenfone 8 battery and software. The phone's small size makes a smaller battery a necessity. 4000 mAh in this case, much smaller than the Zenfone 6 and 7 S 5000 mAh. I felt the difference in using this phone versus a battery-for-days budget or mid-range phone, but I had no problem getting through a full day of moderate use. I even left Strava running for 20 hours by accident, and the battery still had some life in it the next morning. The Zenfone 8 supports 30W wired charging with the included power adapter, which takes an empty battery to 100% in a bit more than an hour. Wireless charging is not supported, which makes the Zenfone 8 a bit of an outlier in the flagship class. An important note for US shoppers is that the Zenfone 8 will only work with AT&T and T-Mobile's LTE and sub-6 GHz 5G networks. You cannot use this phone on Verizon, and there's no support for the fast, but extremely limited, millimeter wave 5G networks. Asus Zenfone 8 camera. There are just 2 cameras on the Zenfone 8 S rear camera bump, and they are both worth your time. As in the Zenfone 7 Pro, the 8-single-S main camera produces 16 megapixel images with vibrant color and plenty of detail in good light. But overall, this camera does fine. It handles moderately low light conditions like a dim store interior well, and night mode does an okay job in very low light, provided you can hold the phone still for a few seconds and your subject is not moving. Asus calls it a flagship-grade sensor, and while that might have been true in 2018, it's at least a step up from the smaller, cheaper sensors often found in ultra-wide cameras. Beauty mode is turned off by default when you switch to the selfie camera, and thank goodness for that. On the camera shooting screen, there's an icon to jump to a 2x 16 megapixel lossless digital zoom to crop in quickly, which works okay, but it is not much reach, and it just makes the limitations of the small sensor and lens more obvious. The lack of true optical zoom or a telephoto camera is a disappointment, but you cannot have everything on such a small device, and I would personally take an ultra-wide before a telephoto any day. The Google Pixel 4a is around the same size, but it's decidedly a budget device with a step-down processor, plastic chassis, and fewer niceties like an IP rating or a fast refresh screen. Aside from battery life, which is manageable, you give up very little in the way of flagship features to get the Zenfone 8-single-S small form factor. You have to look to iOS for this phone's most direct competition, the iPhone 12 mini, which it matches almost spec for spec from the IP rating down to the camera configuration. The 12 mini is actually a little smaller than the Zenfone 8, and when you factor in storage capacity, it's likely to be the more expensive choice at $829 for 256 GB. However, when you consider that the 12 mini will probably get a couple more years of OS and security support, it may be the better buy in the long run, if you are flexible in your choice of operating system. Flagship level build quality and performance quite literally in the palm of your hand. I like the Zenfone 8 a lot, but I am not sure it will find the big audience, at least in the US. I love how the Zenfone 8 feels in my hand and in my pocket, but I do notice how much smaller the screen and everything on it seems compared to the bigger phones I have used recently. There are also a few important considerations, like the lack of compatibility with Verizon and the comparatively short support lifespan of the phone. If you need the absolute best in battery life, the Zenfone 8 cannot offer that, and if you want a class-leading camera, you will need to look elsewhere. All that said, the Zenfone 8 will be the right fit for a specific type of person, and I can heartily recommend it to my fellow small phone fans. You will get flagship level build quality and performance quite literally in the palm of your hand.